So where do I start? This is a massive chapter, and I suspect that you're going to see a lot of people theorizing about it, talking about who this one individual is, and you'll most likely see common answers, frequent ones that are very similar to one another, because I would say it's very difficult to see this one individual and think anything but that. If you know who I'm talking about, trust me, I have some very interesting propositions, ideas away from the easy answer. Whether it's true or not, who knows, but time will tell. After a 2-week break, starting things off between Yoshida and Famine was not on my bingo card. We know Yoshida is weird. That's just who he is at this point. He knows way too much information. His organization trying to achieve something. That something is related to death, the Horsemen, and now prophecy from Nostradamus, which in a way makes a lot of sense. But the idea that he can just call out Famine so directly and invite her to some sort of date very similar to Denji and his interaction at the beginning is funny to me. How did he even find her? Does he have her number? Did he just know where she is? Is his organization or him tracking her? What's the go here? I love Famine though. I think Famine is such a beautiful character because she's just there, existing, vibing. The amount of food that she orders is arguably more than what Denji could, and it works really well. So the idea of her having this insatiable hunger and never being filled is rather fitting. The conversation between these two leads to the prophecy of Nostradamus. And I'm gonna tell you right here, there's no real right or wrong answer for Nostradamus' prophecy because it's very interpretive. The funniest thing about being a prophet, especially all the way back then, is that there was a lot of things that were kind of guessed correctly. If you shoot enough arrows, one will eventually hit. But all of the ones that were just flat out completely wrong were blamed on perception or understanding. I would argue that there is a lot of perspective that needs to be given for Nostradamus, and that it's not something that is set in stone, but something that is viewed differently between people, and the possibility of it could be a thing. This is a genuine thing, by the way. This isn't something that Fujimoto has created. This idea of July 1999 being like the end of times or the start of it is genuinely predicted by Nostradamus. Fujimoto even uses direct words from that passage. A great king of terror will descend, and it will start the end of humanity. Again, a lot of interpretations for this, and I do plan to expand upon it in hopefully interesting ways. Firstly, I enjoy how Yoshida kind of anchors this to society and urban legend, and he just hears a lot of people talking about it being interpreted the wrong way. People are having fun with it because they don't believe it, and the organizations surrounding him are worried. They think this is genuinely going to be a massive thing. So they got convicts, and they got those convicts to make contracts with the future devil to predict this one event. 23 of those 30 convicts will lose their lives July 1999. Yoshida isn't surprised by this. Famine, neither. She's kind of just there, eerily bending her head as she does with the whole balance equilibrium thing, which is what Famine is kind of known for, which is cute. It's weird that Yoshida kind of frames it towards Famine, however. Like, it makes sense logically that he would come to this conclusion, but I find it weird that he would have this much perception on an event that realistically she has no part in, or at least with the information we have, she has no part in. This makes me think that all of Nostradamus, Famine, and what Yoshida is doing is in correlation to death, the final horseman, right? And his purpose to stop that from being resurrected. For me, this is kind of the only reason why he would think Famine is up to something. Just her knowing about Nostradamus or this prophecy or the apocalypse, whatever it may be. Him framing it and contextualizing it this way just feels overall odd unless there's an ulterior purpose for him to actually stop it. And if all of the organizations and him in general are worried about death with his recent kind of talkings about it and interest within it, it would make a lot of sense that they really do not want the fourth and final horseman to appear. On top of this, Yoshida is allowing Famine to operate within her own frequency. I question that. I think he definitely has a lot of eyes on everything going on currently. There's probably more people within the background potentially that work for him or his organization. The threat of treating her like a devil is what confuses me. So this whole time he knew of her existence and kind of just let her be because either this situation or maybe a time where he needs her, or he's trying to group all of them together. I don't think he knows that Asa is war. On the contrary, I think that's the funniest thing about it is because he is so perceptive, he doesn't actually know that Yoru is there already. Makima is up in the air and he's probably searching for her, and he might have an inkling to believe that the control devil is with Denji. Not much to go on, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's loose information there. So now to the big stuff. Nostradamus, the thing that spawns at the end, the other 7 convicts that famine say will die this week. What is fascinating to me is her usage of words, and I'm very curious on what the direct Japanese translation would be. There's a lot of play in words within the Japanese language, and sometimes a lot of it is lost in translation. But these are the words. The first of the devils who will shepherd the world to ultimate terror. She is a devil with the name of a primal fear. Her name is ... The first of the devils, which I think a lot of people glossed over. Theoretically, this is one of many. And this plays into the whole Nostradamus prophecy and the 7th of 1999, the apocalypse, the end of times. So there's most likely going to be more than one devil, and they're all playing the purpose of this apocalyptic Nostradamus prophecy. Now this prophecy, like I said before, very interpretive. It's hard to actually pinpoint what Fujimoto is using from it and what he isn't, because the thing that falls from the sky, the great terror that descends from heaven, is not the problem. That's not what the prophecy is talking about. That is the thing that resurrects the problem. Let me make that clear. The thing we most likely see at the end of the chapter is not the problem, especially if it is the beginning of Nostradamus' prophecy. That thing is here to resurrect something else. And by Famine's words, it is the first of devils who will shepherd the world to the ultimate terror. So what does Nostradamus' prophecy resurrect? Well, within that translation, it's actually a Mongolians, and it theorizes that Mongolians will return within 1999 and their leader would be reborn, thus throwing the world into ultimate chaos and war and death, etc., right? Obviously with Chainsawman's story, it doesn't really seem like the case. I don't expect a great Mongolian warlord to suddenly be resurrected, but then again, you never know with Fujimoto. So this leaves us up in the air. Who is going to be resurrected? And if my guess were to be any, it would be death. It would be the final horseman of the apocalypse. You know how this works really well? Is that when all of the 4 horsemen are born into the world, quite literally they live up to their name. They bring forth the apocalypse. They bring forth the end of times. When you link that to Nostradamus, it kind of makes a lot of sense that things are trying to resurrect death because it's not that simple. Death is a very complex individual. So if death is a horseman and potentially also a primal fear, we don't know, one or the other, maybe both, that would make a lot of sense. Now that's just my idea. However, what throws us off and what's got people very convinced that the thing at the end of this chapter is death or the final horseman is the context building up to it. So we see people talking about life, things in general. They're happy, they're doing a lot of great things, and they're moving forward with life. But then something happens, something switches, and this conversation between 2 people that was so happy and vibrant has now turned into, hey, don't you think we should just die? And they agree and they walk out and they jump off the balcony. That's it. There's no weirdness that happens within it. It's just an instant thought, and then they go and do it. No hesitation, no fear, nothing. So this is where we link Asa's viewing of those balconies with everyone falling, but Yoru has taken control. And she has a little sword to back herself up, a little ruler sword, right? Nothing all too crazy. All of the bodies on the ground merge into a massive pile. They start to creep towards one another, and Yoru starts to panic. She's misjudged this situation, and she cannot win this fight. And you see what these bodies actually give birth to. This extremely humanoid body that has some very interesting appendages, right? So this is a normal human body, just with extra bits and pieces, almost angelical in a way, in a fallen angel. There is what I would consider to be the representation of an umbilical cord, and also a representation of wings. Not to mention the feet are actually hands that are elongated, which seems very specific to the primal fears currently. They have very weird design concepts when it comes to their hands or the representation of hands, but this ends off the chapter. Yoru is running away. She doesn't want to deal with this thing. And your first thought is that, oh, this is the final horseman. This is death. I actually don't think it is. I think death is an easy answer. Simply just, oh, this is death. You know, people jumped off the balcony, it spawned from it, makes a lot of sense, and I agree. However, I think there's a much more interesting way that Fujimoto could take this if he wanted to, and that this isn't death, but a proxy for it. So far, we've seen every horseman utilize tools to do their bidding. What's to say that death is any different? Especially if this Nostradamus prophecy and what famine is doing and how this all kind of links up to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, it would make sense that death cannot be spawned properly, and that things have to take place to give birth to death once again. So I've seen a lot of people say that this is the fear of life, the fear of living. And the more I thought thought about this, the more I think it kind of makes sense with the appearance of it, but not necessarily to the context that was provided. If my guess were to be anything just based on the context, it would be the loss of meaning, the loss of purpose, basically humanity's drive or its willpower to live. I think this is a very powerful thing, but I don't know if it could be a primal fear. Theoretically, I think it could. One of the biggest problems that society and humans have in general that isn't consciously feared is the burnout, loss of purpose or meaning within your own life, and you wouldn't even know when it hits you. The fact that this could happen so frequently and repetitively, like one person can have it multiple different times, finding a purpose then losing it, makes sense of why this could be a primal fear, especially because it is a representation of humanity's loss of meaning, loss of purpose. It links directly with the loss of life. What's the point of living if you have no meaning, if you have no purpose? And when that is amplified to the extent of the context that was given, they had all the more reason to live. They had all these great things happening for them. That person just got a raise, yet suddenly they lost that meaning. They lost that spark, that drive, and death was their only option. They weren't scared of it. They just thought it was natural. They thought it was right because they had no reason to live anymore. What's crazy is how this could easily link to death. See, the loss of life and meaning or purpose directly leads to death, so what better way than to have that person be your servant? You're one step away from it, even if they're a primal fear. So death and this primal fear, potentially being the loss of meaning or purpose, work together, and they are the first of potentially many to resurrect death and fulfill Nostradamus' prophecy. I guess the last thing to mention, what makes me think that Nostradamus' prophecy and its resurrection is actually related to death is that it seems very legitimate. There's not much interpretation of that resurrection. It could be a Mongolian warlord, who knows? But the funniest thing about this is that I can say all of this and I'm most likely completely wrong. The devil at the end could probably be death, could probably be life. This whole idea about Nostradamus and everything could just be a facade. Who knows? It's difficult to tell with Fujimoto, with where he wants to go and what he wants to do, but I love it because it keeps us on our toes. But most likely I would say that Denji rocks up, probably with Naruto as well, and they fight whatever this thing is, and it's going to be a pretty big thing. I am more than excited to see where we go from here, but I want to know all of your thoughts, all of your theories on this chapter right now. Thank you.